I pulled 7 cans of tuna off my pantry shelf last month. The same brands most people have sitting in their own cabinet right now. Flipped every one of them over and read the ingredient list straight through instead of trusting the picture of a fresh tuna steak on the front. What I found wasn't fish fraud exactly. Nobody's putting something else in the can and calling it tuna, but it wasn't just fish either. By the time you count what's actually in some of these cans, a real chunk of what you're paying tuna prices for isn't tuna at all. My name is Walter. I've spent over 20 years farming and reading labels the same way I read a soil test. Because if you don't check what's actually in something, you're just trusting a company's marketing department to tell you the truth, and that's never been a great bet. So let's go through what I found can by can, and I'll show you exactly which two earned a spot back in my pantry. Here's the rule before we start, and it applies to tuna exactly the way it applies to everything else I've ever pulled apart on this channel. A can of tuna needs 2 things to exist honestly: tuna and salt. That's the whole traditional recipe. Everything else in the can is there to solve a manufacturing problem. Stretching volume, softening flavor, cutting cost, not a fish problem. First, StarKist water pack lines. Flip the can over, and right after tuna and water, you'll find vegetable broth. That sounds harmless enough until you call the company directly, which people have done, and get the actual answer. StarKist has confirmed that broth is made from carrots, celery, garlic, onions, parsley, peas, soybeans, tomatoes, and potato extract. So the water pack can you thought was just tuna, and water is actually tuna water and a vegetable and soy blend added specifically to soften the natural fish flavor most people are trying to get when they buy tuna in the first place. Second, chicken of the seas, water pack lines, same story, different company. Their own website explains it plainly. Vegetable broth is added, in their words, as a flavor enhancer, resulting in a milder flavor. Their broth blend includes soybeans, cabbage, carrots, celery, garlic, onions, and several more vegetables, depending on the batch. Read that again. A company selling you tuna is telling you, in their own words, that they're diluting the actual taste of the fish on purpose. Third, Bumblebee's water-packed lines. Same broth trick. Their version made from carrots, peas, bell peppers, onion, parsley, celery, and garlic. And on several of their white albacore products, you'll also find hydrolyzed soy protein and sodium pyrophosphate added directly to the fish itself, not just the packing liquid. Hydrolyzed soy protein is worth knowing about specifically because it can naturally contain trace amounts of MSG, even though MSG itself never appears on the label. Fourth, the private label chunk-light tuna most grocery chains sell under their own store brand. I checked several, and the pattern holds almost identically to the big 3: tuna, water, vegetable broth containing soy, salt. Different label, same formula, because a lot of store brand canneries are simply packing the same base recipe under a cheaper name. Fifth, the flavored and seasoned tuna pouches, the ranch, the lemon pepper, the sriracha varieties that have gotten popular the last few years. Convenient for lunch, sure, but once you add a flavor packet on top of the broth that was already in the can, you're often looking at added sugar, extra sodium, and a longer ingredient list than the plain version sitting right next to it on the same shelf. Sixth, budget imported chunk tuna in water, often labeled yellowfin, sold at the lowest price point in the aisle. Same broth with soy pattern shows up here too. Tuna, water, vegetable broth containing soy, salt, which tells you this isn't one company's cost-cutting trick. It's become close to an industry standard for anything packed in water. Seventh, the tuna salad kits, the pre-made cups with crackers, and a mayo packet sold for a quick lunch. These typically start from the same broth-packed base tuna, then add a mayonnaise-based dressing with its own additive list stacked on top, so you're compounding the dilution twice before you even get to the crackers. Now, I want to be fair about what this actually means, because I'm not going to stand here and tell you 7 major companies are secretly not selling you fish. They are. It's real tuna in every one of those cans. What's happening is dilution, not substitution. A portion of what you're paying tuna prices for is water, and a vegetable broth blend added specifically to cut costs and soften flavor, not to improve the fish. That's a real difference worth knowing, even if it's not outright fraud. Here are the 2 that pass clean. The first is Wild Planet. Their ingredient list is exactly 2 items on the solid options: wild tuna and salt, sometimes wild tuna alone, with nothing added at all. No water, no oil, no broth, no soy. What you're tasting is the fish itself, nothing softening it or stretching it. The second is Polar Canned Albacore. Same story, albacore tuna, water, salt, nothing else riding along behind it. No vegetable broth, no soy protein, no phosphate added. It's about as close to a can of plain, honest fish as you'll find on a mainstream grocery shelf. Both of those brands cost a bit more per can than the big 3. That's not a coincidence either. Real undiluted fish costs more to pack than fish stretched with water and a cheap vegetable broth blend. And the price difference on the shelf is telling you almost exactly how much of the cheaper cans isn't fish at all. I want to give you the practical test, because this is the same thing I do every time I'm standing in an aisle deciding what goes in my cart. Flip the can over and read straight through the ingredient list. If it says tuna and salt or tuna, water, and salt, you're looking at an honest can. If you see the words vegetable broth, especially with soy listed as an allergen at the bottom, you're looking at a can where a real portion of what you're paying for is a flavoring agent, not fish. If you see hydrolyzed soy protein or sodium pyrophosphate added directly to the tuna itself, that's a step further. Additives designed to change texture and masking flavor, not just the packing liquid around it. There's a second thing worth knowing while you're standing there, because it matters for a different reason entirely, and that's species. Albacore, sold as white tuna, runs noticeably higher in mercury than skipjack, sold as light or chunk light tuna, simply because albacore are larger fish that live longer and accumulate more mercury over their lifespan. That's not a brand issue, that's biology, and it's worth knowing if you're eating tuna regularly, pregnant, or feeding it to small children, where the FDA and EPA both recommend sticking to the lower mercury light tuna varieties more often than the white albacore. Here's why I think this pattern keeps showing up across almost everything in the grocery store, tuna included. Vegetable broth is cheap, soy protein is cheap, water is free. Real fish, packed with nothing added to stretch it, costs the company more per can, and that cost either gets passed on to you at a higher shelf price or it gets diluted out with broth and water so the company can hold the price down and the margin up at the same time. Most people never flip the can over to check which one they're actually buying. They just grab whatever's on sale and trust the picture on the front. So here's what I want you to do. Next time you're in that aisle, pick up whatever tuna you normally buy and actually read the ingredient list before it goes in your cart, even if you've bought that brand for years, because formulas shift and you'd never know unless you check yourself. If you see vegetable broth with soy listed underneath, know that you're buying diluted tuna, not fake tuna, but diluted all the same, and decide if that's worth the price difference to you. If you want the genuine article, tuna and salt and nothing else, Wild Planet and Polar are both sitting on most grocery shelves right now, usually just a few feet from the cans I just walked you through. I'll leave you with the bigger point, because it's the same one that keeps showing up every time I do one of these. This isn't really about tuna. It's about how many places in a grocery store the exact same trick plays out. A cheap filler added quietly to a product that used to be just one honest ingredient. Disclosed legally in 6-point type on the back, while the front of the package keeps selling you the simple version you think you're getting. Once you start flipping cans and bags over as a habit, you start noticing it everywhere, not just in the seafood aisle. Tell me in the comments which of these 7 you've got sitting in your own pantry right now. I read every one of these. And I'd like to know how many of you had no idea vegetable broth in your tuna meant soy until today. And if you found a clean, honest brand near you that I didn't mention, drop the name, because I'd rather build a real list with all of you than assume I've already found every good one myself. Next time, I want to do the same test on canned chicken, because what gets added to that can surprise me even more than this did. Until then, read the back before you trust the front. And remember, if it needs a broth blend to taste like what it's supposed to be, it probably isn't much of that thing to begin with.